My hometown of Cape Town shares a lot of similar themes with that of Berlin. The culture, the open-mindedness, the passion for creativity, and the millennials with beards and sneakers. Historically, we also share something quite significant with Berlin. Around the time the Berlin Wall was coming down, apartheid was starting to unravel in South Africa. Both cities shared the optimism and the hope that comes with such liberating events, and looked forward to the rebuilding and integration of these cities, along with the struggles that would come from rebuilding and reintegration. But the imaginary walls of Cape Town were harder to bring down than the concrete walls of Berlin. Most people are familiar with the Instagram shots of the mountain, the beautiful beaches, the winelands, but this is a drone shot of a village in Cape Town, in Hout Bay, that shows the line running through the poor and the rich, the impoverished, and the congested living quarters of those who are still impoverished in South Africa. 25 years after liberation, we are now in a situation that, despite having put millions of people into a middle-class sector, there's still more inequality today than there was under apartheid. Now, this talk was supposed to be about cultural empowerment, but before I can go there, I need to share with you a story about the disempowerment that we have suffered under our leadership over the last 10 years. That decade, starting from 2008, when President Jacob Zuma was appointed to run South Africa, is now a lost decade for us. Africa as a continent was receiving interest and investment like never seen before. And instead, we squandered that. I'm glad there's so many young people here today because there's a little bit of a history lesson in what I'm about to share with you. So back in the 90s, when we were busy putting together a new constitution, and our lawmakers, who were obviously eternal optimists, only ever envisaged someone like Nelson Mandela leading our country. So they wrote into our constitution the powers for the president to select ministers, the head of state security, the public protector, and other bodies on a whim. Now, that's all fine and great when Nelson Mandela is your leader, but when you give someone like Jacob Zuma that power, bad things are going to happen, and bad things did. When he came to power, he began a process of systematically allowing a corrupt family to take over key ministries in our government. This process was called state capture. Compromised individuals were put into these key ministries that would allow state contracts to be given to corporates in exchange for kickbacks. Running parallel to this process of state capture was a process of capturing the media. The public broadcaster became the state broadcaster. Funding from government advertising budgets was channeled away from independent titles and towards new politically compromised newspaper houses. The biggest newspaper house in the country was bought with public investment corporation money and money from the Chinese. The second biggest newspaper house in the country was taken over by private equity players, and who then took the profit motive and started chopping quality journalists from the newsrooms. Management always seems to be the last to go in those kind of situations. So it was into this environment that the Daily Maverick was born in 2009. We had no idea that looking back, we would count established media, Google and Facebook, and the government of South Africa as the biggest threats to our existence. Our newsroom started with just 5 employees and a mission to tell the truth, to go out there and to put quality journalism on the map in South Africa. Today, we have over 30 journalists and editors who work in our newsroom, 2/3 of whom are women, All our managing editors are women, and all our investigative journalists are women except for one. We didn't do that by design. We just managed to create a safe space for people who wanted to come in and do meaningful work. Over the years, as that capture the state media happened, many people were pushed out and could no longer work in those compromised institutions. In April last year, we received a hard drive that contained 300,000 emails proving the corrupt relationship between key ministers and this family of brothers called the Guptas. This hard drive came to our editor-in-chief through a series of meetings, and the minute we got this hard drive, we knew that the game had changed. But before we could do anything ourselves, we had to make sure that the whistleblowers were relocated out the country. We knew that while we had this information, and while we had not yet published, the risk to them and to ourselves was through the roof. Coded messages began. We reached out to another non-profit investigative journalism outfit in South Africa who'd been studying and investigating the Guptas for 8 years. We worked with them, at the same time worked with funders trying to raise the money to get these whistleblowers out of the country. We didn't know at the time that the people that we were working with would take a copy of that hard drive and give it to opposition parties, the biggest Sunday newspaper in the country, and other parties. So while we were planning to raise the funding and to relocate the whistleblowers and relocate our team out of the country to do the investigations, we woke up one Sunday morning to find the first in a series of articles running stories from the hard drive. We really expected to see the whistleblowers floating in a dam or being gunned down in some way because it wasn't very hard to figure out where this information was coming from. But we changed our plans from reporting and investigating overseas to reporting in Cape Town. We reached out to the biggest online news site in South Africa, and we said, let's do this together. We abandoned the self-interest or the profit motive in order to make sure that we could defend the truth and we could get the stories out as quickly as possible. The elections for the presidency of the ANC was happening in December 2017, and we knew we had to get as many of these stories out before that date. So we worked with our partners from Amabungani and News 24, and we put out 70 investigative exposés that proved the corrupt relationship between this family, various ministries, and the corporates who were involved in those kickbacks. Companies like KPMG, McKinsey's, Bain, Liebherr, and SAP all extracted billions of euros out of the South African economy through these corrupt relationships over a period of 10 years. But the biggest thing that happened through all of this was the fact that President Zuma was still around. He was getting his ex-wife to run, because he had run his 2 terms, and she was running in his place. And after 70 exposés, after marches in the streets, after a historically poorly run campaign, Mrs. Zuma, or ex-Zuma, because Azana Dlamini Zuma, only lost the election by less than 3%. Through all of that, we managed to dodge a bullet. But the gun was still loaded. President Zuma hadn't resigned yet, and only after another 2 months of frustrating hanging on by the president did he realize that the time was there for him to go. The whistleblowers are still outside of the country. We still face the challenge of sustainability every day. We still fight Google and Facebook. We still fight the regulatory attempts that were put in place by the previous regime. The Film and Publications Board of South Africa recently had a law that was passed that was voted in Parliament that gives them the ability to censor the internet. In their minds, they think they can censor the internet. That anything that they deem inappropriate, that they will be able to start sanctions, fines, and moves against whoever publishes that stuff. So I'll leave you with the thought. I'll leave you with the thought because it's something that sticks with me quite a lot. And that where we started, a team of 5 people that grew to 30, that effectively became the defense of our democracy. A couple of people with laptops and 3G modems. So the next time you feel that you're small and insignificant, and I'm sure you've heard this before, try spending a night with a mosquito. Thank you.